All right, well, welcome to this information session for the Master of Human Rights program. As I mentioned, I'm also recording a video, so I'll probably look that way, but also look at you at the same time. So yeah, I just wanted to provide some basic information on the program, and I hope that we get applications from the University of Manitoba and elsewhere. Every year we get a lot of international applications, a lot from across Canada, and a few from the University of Manitoba, so I'm also trying to drum up some business here, so to speak. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting program, definitely, and I think as we can see from the news, I think human rights issues are absolutely everywhere, which I think is what makes them also fascinating to study. They're very socially vital. But before I get into the substance of things, I wanted to give a territorial acknowledgement. So the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojibwe Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And this is something certainly that we also prioritize in the Master of Human Rights program, something that maybe is especially new to international students, a bit less new to Canadian students. But it's really important for us as a program to connect to the place that we're in. And I think there are a lot of human rights programs worldwide. I mean, I've studied in some of them, where you're only studying things that happen thousands of kilometers away. And we do that in this program, but we also want to study exactly what's happening in Winnipeg. We want to talk about our context and to understand where we are. So I'll run through a brief presentation on the program, and then of course you have the opportunity to ask questions. And Marissa, welcome Marissa. Marissa Renier is a student in the Master of Human Rights program, and she'll also share a little bit on the student experience as well. So why study the Master of Human Rights program? Well, it's the first master's program in human rights in Canada, which in and of itself is kind of surprising, to be honest, because there are many Canadians working worldwide, I think, in human rights careers. But nonetheless, we are the first in Canada. It's got a rich interdisciplinary curriculum, so you could really focus, and I'll go through this a little bit, but you could focus on really in what you're most interested in. And we also prioritize that interdisciplinary approach, so we can analyze problems from the perspective, of social work, education, social sciences, history, law. We bring it all to bear to understand human rights issues. There's also a unique cluster of human rights institutions in Winnipeg, which probably you're familiar with in this room, but maybe people online would be less familiar with. And we also really emphasize actually providing some tools to have a career in human rights. So we want to, kind of disrupt the idea of the ivory tower. I mean, we have a bit of that ivory tower. We're in a very nice room right now, which feels like an ivory tower room. But at the same time, as I said, it's really important for us to connect with our community and to engage with our community. And that also means providing students with practical tools to do human rights work and not just study human rights. We also do that, and we also study theoretical things, but we want to learn how to do human rights. So our curriculum, just briefly, I mean, we have 6 courses that you take throughout your degree. So there are 3 required courses, and then you take 3 elective courses. The 3 required courses are human rights theory and practice, which I usually teach. And that's kind of our social, scientific, and philosophical course on human rights. So I've divided this course actually into theory and practice. So the theory part of the course is of course about understanding human rights, looking at critical debates in the human rights field, like the classic cultural relativism versus universalism debate, looking at things like the role of religion, or how religion interacts or doesn't interact, or sometimes conflicts with human rights, all that kind of stuff. And then when we move to practice of human rights, we talk first of all about the causes of human rights violations, which I think is also often left out of human rights programs. So we want to ask those kind of why causal questions, and actually try to understand why particular violations happen, and to be able to analyze them at different levels, from right down to the individual level to talking about the state level, and even the international level, the level of the international system. So that's kind of what we do in that class, and then we get into responses, where we talk about things like social movements, we talk about strategic litigation, all these kinds of things. Human rights law is a course on human rights law, needless to say, which I think is really important for anybody studying human rights. So students will get a fundamental understanding of the important legal frameworks, a bit of a focus on international human rights law, but also definitely drawing in the Canadian context. Finally, human rights research and methods. So this is our methods course, but rather than just teaching kind of a general methods course like you might take in arts, like you might take in social work any place else, we really try to tailor it again for human rights work. So we talk a lot about, how to incorporate human rights approaches into research, for example. So not just, qualitative and quantitative methods, but thinking a lot about ethics, thinking a lot about power, and also we talk a lot about advocacy and how to actually do advocacy. So that's one of the methods that we start to teach in this course as well, beyond just research methods. And also, maybe I should say, for research methods, we also consider context beyond academia. So what's the difference between writing an NGO report versus writing an academic article versus working for a think tank or writing a newspaper editorial? These are all actually very different types of writing. We talk about that. And then students take 3 elective courses, and you could find the list of electives on our website. So these are drawn from the 4 faculties which kind of contribute to and make up the program: art, social work, education, and law. So I don't even know how many courses, but there are a lot of electives you can take. Of course, this differs year by year, but always there are a lot of choices, so you can use those to kind of specialize. Then you either do a practicum or a thesis, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And you also do a second language requirement if you don't have that already. If you have that already, then you don't need to do it. But this is an additional component of our program. So our program is also comprised of international experts drawn from across these 4 faculties. So again, you have people with a really wide variety of areas of specialty and expertise, from everything to the law of armed conflict, if I look at Dr. Dureko on the slide, to things like health and human rights, or Bruno, who's on the slide in the bottom, I should say Dr. Jing, but on the slide on the bottom left there, often uses arts-based approaches to look at human rights. He's from the Faculty of Education. So yeah, we have this really wide variety of expertise, which again allows you to be mentored by people who are ideally studying exactly what you're interested in. Winnipeg itself has, I think, a unique cluster of human rights institutions in Canada. So obviously we have the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, which is located just over there on the U of M campus, which is kind of the main, I guess you could say the main Canadian body dealing with the legacy of residential schools and that side of transitional justice in Canada. And we often have students who are working there, sometimes in employment contracts, sometimes in practica, but we have a lot of relationship with them. We have the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which of course is in the background of the slide, the Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice, the Center for Human Rights Research, which is an interdisciplinary center looking at human rights issues, the Canadian Journal of Human Rights, based in the Faculty of Law, the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, the International Human Rights Advocacy Clinic, which you haven't heard of because it hasn't started yet, but it will be starting in the course of this year. The name is also subject to change, of course, but we have some funding from the University of Manitoba to create this International Human Rights Clinic. So we're working on that. That'll probably start in the fall. That is the goal, at least, but we'll be looking to give students opportunities to undertake practical, impactful projects in human rights. And finally, we have a rich civil society tradition in Winnipeg. So there are a lot of NGOs working on social justice issues, working on human rights issues, and we're connected to many of them through our program. We also emphasize land-based learning, or broadly speaking, learning outside the classroom. So we have a series of human rights practice workshops, which again try to imbue professional skills onto students. We have a practicum stream. We also have land-based learning activities that we undertake every year. So we have a human rights tour, which we've developed and we've done twice. And we always do a tour of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We're also developing activities relating to Indigenous peoples, especially to Indigenous legal orders and sort of connecting Indigenous understandings of the law and of human rights, actually with the land, and specifically this land where we're standing right now, where the University of Manitoba is. So our students come from really, as you can see, this is a pandemic picture. Maybe we're still in the pandemic, depending on who you ask. But at any rate, our students come from a really wide range of backgrounds, which I think really makes our program stronger. So, you know, they have really diverse life experience. Some of them maybe are coming straight from their bachelor's, others have work experience as well. So this year, for example, we have a doctor from Brazil, you know, a medical doctor. We have someone from Bangladesh who worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Rohingya refugee camps. We always have students who are social workers. I mean, we had somebody who worked for Child and Family Services, which is an area in Canada which is fraught with human rights issues. We have people who are activists in their countries, including Canada, of course, people who've worked for NGOs. But you don't need this work experience, but you do benefit from having people with this variety of backgrounds in the program. And we have students really coming from all over the world. I think more and more our students are coming from everywhere, except for Europe. We don't have that many students from Europe or from the United States. But other than that, we have students coming from everywhere. So just in our most recent cohort, we have students, of course, from Canada, but also Chile, Brazil, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Bangladesh, and Iran, which again, I think really makes the program much richer. And our students, I think, are really passionate about human rights and really passionate about making a difference. So they tend to really want to be here and really want to be working in human rights, which I think is exciting and inspiring. The thesis versus the practicum, just briefly, and then I'll stop talking soon. But we have two options in the program. One is the thesis. So the thesis obviously is focused on original research on students who are more research oriented. Might be the better option for doing a PhD, though you're not precluded from, in either case. Whether you do the practicum, you could still do a PhD. If you do a thesis, you might not go on to be an academic either, for that matter. But at any rate, the thesis involves a 20,000 to 25,000 word thesis based on original research. It also involves a thesis proposal and a thesis defense at the very end of the process. The practicum is more focused, obviously, on practical experience, and I think it's a lot of students, I think, apply to our program specifically because of the practicum. So students in the practicum stream do a 300-hour work placement, and they also write a major research paper, which is 7,500 to 10,000 words. And both thesis and practicum students also participate once in our symposium, which is kind of our student conference that we have once a year. So I'm not going to read all these, and I don't think it's an exhaustive list, but these are some of the placements we've had for our practicum program. So we had a student at NATO, we have had students at the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth. We had a student at La Via Campesina, which is a peasants' rights organization, and she was directly involved in advocacy at the UN for peasants' rights. And many other places, so many other local and not local non-government organizations, also people like Legal Aid, all this kind of stuff. Human rights practice workshops, this is just kind of an example list, but through these workshops we're complementing our academic curriculum through trying to give students professional skills. So we have, I think on average we have maybe about 8 of these workshops a year, and they're in things like project management, trauma-informed approaches to working. It might be human rights investigations, digital verification, relating of course to human rights investigations as well, human rights education, human rights careers, etc., etc. Just a small list, but we do these workshops every year for our students. Joining our program, this one is actually difficult to read too much on the slide, but the deadline for the program is December 1st of each year, so of course it's December 1st of this year as well. And I believe you have to have paid the application fee. I think everything has to be in by December 1st, as I understand it. Our minimum academic requirement is a 4-year bachelor degree, excepting there are a few countries where they don't have 4-year degrees, and then they'll accept a 3-year degree, but you can contact our admissions officer if you have questions about that. But Canada, you need a 4-year degree. 2 letters of reference, a research proposal, but only if you're applying to the thesis stream, a statement of interest or a motivation letter. We prefer people who have a demonstrated interest in human rights, but that's a flexible requirement, so not everybody is going to have studied human rights for years, obviously. But it's always good if you have some of that, if you can. Application process, the application opens every year. Well, it's open right now, and it closes on December 1st. I think I've already said all this, actually. But basically, everything needs to be in by December 1st. That's the short version. So a couple of application tips. And maybe this is self-evident, but also maybe not. But write a strong motivation letter. And I think really you want to explain why you want to study in this program and why you're interested in human rights. You know, and it is a competitive process, so every year we get students with great grades that we don't admit into the program, just to be blunt. We do admit many with great grades though as well. And the reason for that is often the motivation letter, that we don't have the sense that this is really what they want to be doing. So it's important to foreground that in your motivation letter. In terms of references that you provide have the option of just writing in this form or providing a full letter. It's better to have a full letter. You know, again, this is not a formal requirement, but I think it can strengthen your application. So we're not going to not let someone in because they don't have a full letter, but it can make your application stronger if you have a full letter from somebody who's also writing you a strong reference and is willing to write a positive letter. Ensure that your application is complete. May be obvious, but if it's not complete, then I never see it. So it's really important everything is in there. So kind of general timelines on admission. The deadline, as I said, is December 1st. Generally, our committee, the admissions committee, will meet in kind of late January, early February. Decisions on admissions are released kind of in March and April, because after us, then they go to graduate studies. And usually people find out about scholarships around June and July. Funding opportunities. You could find these on our website, that's named on the slide, so I won't go through all of them. But we have a number of things that you're automatically considered for when you apply. International Graduate Student Fellowship. Of course, you have to be an international student to get that one. The University of Manitoba Graduate Fellowship, the sector fellowships. There are some additional things you can apply for once you're in the program. The Baba Nanak Scholarship for Human Rights, the Mahatma Gandhi Scholarship in Human Rights, and there's also some travel funding available to go to conferences in the case of our travel award from FGS, Faculty of Graduate Studies. As well, we have a program-specific fund for people who are doing practica outside Manitoba or for people who are doing research outside of Manitoba. Further information, this is really just for reference. That's the background of this slide is a map that we newly developed for our human rights tour, which I think is also available on our website now, I believe. So again, just emphasizing this land-based approach to things and grounding our program in local human rights issues. And for further information, you could contact the admissions officer, Rory Churchill-Henry, especially in terms of process type questions, which he might know and I might not know in some cases. And for questions more about the curriculum and that kind of thing, you can contact me. But really, you could contact me on anything, but I know less about the process stuff. So that's it. Marissa, can you please add a few words?
Sure. Sorry. Okay, thank you, Dr. Anderson. So my name is Marissa. I am in my last little stretch of the program. I actually entered the program right from U of M after completing my undergraduate degree. And what really drew me to the program was the opportunity to either pursue a practicum stream or a thesis stream. I went into the program with the original intent to do a practicum because I really wanted to get that work experience in human rights and really kind of get better picture of the issues within our province. I was fortunate enough to be placed in a practicum placement that really aligned with my research, though my research interest had changed over the course of the program. I think what I initially put in my motivational statement is still kind of on the back burner and still a big interest of mine, but as I started working within the program, doing different research papers, looking at different topics, I kind of fell into a placement that was really good with what I wanted to pursue within the city. So the program has so many good opportunities to kind of branch off and explore different research interests, or we've even had people kind of start in a practicum and then want to focus on their own original research and transfer over to a thesis stream. I know a couple of people from my cohort have done that, and it's all kind of all up to you at the end of the day and what you are really focusing on and what you're really passionate about in human rights. The program itself has very good support systems for kind of that transition from undergraduate to master's, which was something I was very worried about because the papers are large and there's 7,500 words and all of that fun stuff. So the support being there from that first transition into seminars instead of courses that you would have in undergraduate and really sitting into intense topic seminars, which was really good. So you felt kind of comfortable and secure as you're making your way through the program, which I thought was very important and extremely helpful to navigating the program. The program has a student association that kind of helps NU students with either kind of navigating the program as well as kind of your little support system as to if we want to bring in speakers and kind of stuff like that. So that's pretty neat, and that's kind of that is unique to the program as much as every other program. So you have that additional support from your professors, and then you also have your support from your student association, which is extremely helpful. So that's kind of my general experience. I talk fast, I'm sorry.
That's good.
That's it? Okay, thank you.
So, I always forget to introduce myself.
Yeah.
I'm that person there, Professor Kjell Anderson. So I'm the director of the program, and just maybe out of interest, I mean, my own research is really focused on mass atrocities, on the causes and prevention of mass atrocities, and mostly I've worked especially on perpetrators of mass atrocities, and I've interviewed many perpetrators of mass atrocities and written a couple of books on that, and that's kind of what I do, and I'm also the director of the program. So, does anybody, I hope somebody has some questions, rather than me just talking towards the camera.
What is job prospects upon graduation? What doorways does it sort of open for?
Can you also introduce yourself if you feel comfortable?
I'm in social work right now.
Okay.
That's not.
Yeah, jobs, actually our students have by and large gotten great jobs, which I'm quite happy to say. I almost want to say I'm surprised to say, pleasantly surprised, because we've really had a great record in terms of students getting employment. So if I could think of some examples, and when we have students working for several governments, I mean provincial governments, we have, I think the Manitoba Human Rights Commission has hired at least 3 of our students. We've had students who worked at the Human Rights Museum. We've had students working in a lot of different NGOs. We had a student who went to the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court for basically a clerkship. Yeah, probably lots that I'm forgetting, and some students have been hired right out of their practicum, and we don't want to promise that because of course it usually doesn't happen, but it's happened quite often actually that the practicum sites have liked our students so much that if there's a position, they just say, hey, okay, maybe you can work for us. So, yeah, so it's a pretty wide range of careers, and of course you could also go on and do a PhD if you want to be an academic. Probably you're not thinking that right now. most undergrad students are not thinking that. Or of course you could also become a lawyer. You could approach things from that angle and go become a human rights lawyer, and we've had a couple of students who've done that as well. Or worked for an international organization.
I'm just wanted to touch on with my, sorry, I'll stand up again. With my practicum, it actually extended into my academic year. So I kind of did the 300 hours during the course of the summer. And even though it's not a placement that is promising further career, it's a placement that is putting me in a career through the rest of the duration of the program. So that is also something that can happen and that you can consider as well. Just want to make a brief note on that.
Yeah.
My name is Jordan. I'm also in social work. I do have a previous degree in philosophy, and I know that you mentioned one of the courses does have like a philosophical element. I was just wondering if you could speak more about that. Is there room to like really think about the philosophy of human rights in this program?
Definitely. I mean, I suspect you know more about it than I do, actually, in this case. I mean, if you've done a whole degree in philosophy, but yeah, I mean, definitely that could come in a whole bunch of places. It could be, well, it would probably be mainly in that course, but there could be elective courses as well, I think, where you bring that to bear. So, yeah, so I mean, in that class we talk a lot about, you know, kind of classic theories of philosophy in terms of, you know, social goods and stuff like that, and of course specifically human rights, and whether human rights are rooted, for example, in natural law, or whether you take a more positivist approach and they're more about treaty making and this kind of thing as we see on the international level. So you can definitely bring that in. Ms. Jordan. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Martin, so I was a bit late, so I didn't hear all of it, but
It's okay.
I'm wondering to what extent does this program cover international issues when it comes to human rights cases versus domestic issues?
It's really a blending of the two. So we talk, I mean, my own background is actually very international, maybe too international in a sense. So I've actually had to kind of get up to speed on Canada, even though I'm Canadian, but I've worked mostly outside of Canada. So yeah, we really try to meld the two because, you know, I was saying earlier, but it's, we want to be connected to the place we're in at the same time, but a lot of the important human rights mechanisms, of course, are located outside of Canada. In a sense, the Canadian human rights system is actually pretty weak. You know, we don't have any kind of regional human rights court like you would find in Latin America or like you would find in Europe or Africa, actually. So yeah, so we kind of have to draw from that international human rights background as well. So again, it's sort of, a lot of it is up to you in terms of where you choose to focus. So you could write papers on human rights in Iran, for example, if that's what interests you. You could write papers on the legacy of residential schools in Canada, if that's what interests you. So there's a lot of scope actually to decide, you know, where you want to steer things in terms of your own interests. You're welcome. But a lot of human rights law, I think, by its nature, is kind of international. You know, if we look at the UN covenants and a lot of the human rights instruments, of course, are grounded in treaties. You're the only one who has asked a question. I shouldn't call on you. Now I'm in teacher mode.
Yeah, I'm Esmea. I'm also in social work. I don't have a question right now because...
You don't actually have to ask a question.
That's okay. I will do a reflection. I'm looking into next fall, personally. I want to work for a little bit. But I was interested in this program because it is something I haven't heard before. And I'd like to stay in Manitoba for a bit because I feel like there's a lot that we can do. And within the human rights scope, I think I want to learn a lot more about it. So I think this has been good, but I'm thinking still in the future.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think social work, you were from social work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think social work is an area that's really, there's so many human rights issues and there's so much more attention paid to it than there was in the past. I mean, we talked earlier about how the curriculum here at the U of M is changing in terms of social work, but yeah, now I think it's really widely understood for social workers that human rights have to be part of, you know, almost every conversation in terms of thinking about the ethics of how you actually do social work and the implications of social work. So yeah, so I think it's a really fascinating area as well, that if you do eventually decide to apply, you could draw from that, I think, as well, in terms of what you're doing. And sorry, you had another question as well, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering, when it comes to, I think she asked a question about the jobs that you can go through this program.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. It's something to be honest, we haven't done a lot of just because of the pandemic, you know, but I think, I mentioned earlier, but there's something called the Morrow Travel Fund. So we actually have a fund that's specifically to defray the costs of doing international, well, I shouldn't say international, outside of Manitoba, so that can be international, research as well as practicum placement. So I think we'll do more and more of those kinds of international things. But as a student, again, you have the scope to, yeah, to do those things with, basically with our support as well, if you're interested in whether it's a practicum placement or doing thesis research somewhere else. It's definitely possible. Jordan.
So a huge part of the appeal of the program, I think, is like the interdisciplinary scope of it. And one thing I just, on the outset of that, I find myself thinking is like, okay, well, I might know social work pretty well, but law, education, these are things I'm not an expert in or not educated on to the same extent. Is it prudent to like familiarize myself with the different disciplines, so like there's like a vocabulary or shared knowledge, or is it like, you know, all of the people will come together and kind of the interesting stuff will happen from their different perspectives articulating? Like I'm not, I think it's what I'm getting at. I think I'm not phrasing this well.
Yeah, no, I understand completely what you're saying, and I think it's more the latter, because we have students with these really diverse backgrounds. Everybody's at different levels. Somebody, you know, some of them have never studied law before. Some of them might be lawyers. So that's a big difference, you know, already. So we try to accommodate that obviously within our classes and to give everybody some basic grounding. But we're never going to sort of teach people every discipline that's a part of our program in a sense. So it's more about learning how to integrate the different disciplines and how to draw from different disciplines, but the capacities are always going to be different for different students, definitely. So, yeah, but it is kind of a challenge, but not a bad challenge, because we have students who are legal, who aren't, for example, used to thinking of these causal questions that I mentioned earlier. So if I say let's do kind of a sociological analysis of houselessness in Winnipeg. Some people who are lawyers might not be very comfortable with that idea, because right away they're saying, okay, well, what are the applicable legal frameworks? And I'm saying, no, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to think about these kind of policy issues. And sort of conversely, obviously, if people have never studied human rights law or law in general, there's also kind of a different logic there, which can sometimes seem bewildering at first or a bit complex, but then I think everybody, you know, relatively gets the hang of it. But that's part of the magic, I think, of having an interdisciplinary class. But I think everybody's uncomfortable at some point.
Yeah.
I see Marissa nodding. Not in a bad way, though. We all get there eventually.
I know I didn't have any like education or law experience prior to going in. I came from sociology and psychology for my undergraduate degree. And yeah, of course, like you're sitting in some classes, you're kind of like, what are we all saying? But then you're sitting in another class where you're like, oh wait, no, I can actually do kind of like what Dr. Anderson said, the sociological perspective of it, whereas somebody else will bring a legal perspective into it, which is really nice, because then you can collaborate and you can work to help each other help understand, right? So, and it's definitely not necessarily, and I definitely did not have it going into the program.
Yeah, and I think there's a real practical value in that multidisciplinarity, and that's also what we hear from, you know, employers, whether it's NGOs or people who are doing, even people doing litigation, say actually it's great for us to have multidisciplinary teams and people who might understand other angles, because often like a legal solution is useful in certain ways, but there are limitations as well, you know, and then you might turn to more general advocacy and thinking about how can we move this issue forward, you know, whether it's, you know, disability rights in Manitoba, for example. And it's not going to be all about the courts, but the courts are usually, or are often a part of it. But how do you do things like raising public awareness, for example? So that's where that multidisciplinarity is actually really valuable. Any other questions? Anything you want to add, Marissa? Don't have to, but...
No, I was going to say kind of to touch on the disciplinaries, I just had it I just had it in my, oh yeah, it's nice to kind of be open to experiencing something outside of your comfort zone. I think within this program, if you know social work like the back of your hand, for example, because the majority of you are from social work, and you're super comfortable with that, but yet the legal frameworks and all, and the other theories surrounding those is something you haven't experienced yet. By doing the research and kind of diving into a really like a pretty broad topic, you're exposed to that, so you're almost not forced, but like you're taking in all of that information from a different angle, and that only strengthens either your commitment to human rights and social work, or kind of wherever you want to go with it. So I think the different avenues that the program can take you are really important to kind of break out of your shell, of your comfort shell, I guess. That's my last little bit.
All right, so I think this presentation will be uploaded to YouTube as well, but of course you could find information on our website. You could reach out to me or to Rory, the admissions officer, if you have any other questions.